Well, first, if you don't think this is a big deal, just know that Microsoft is looking at restarting nuclear reactors. Mark Twain said, good writers borrow, great writers steal. I don't think you can do that with this. AI is moving too quick, but in our space, the last mile is the human, and human discernment cannot be replicated by AI. It's a great way to kind of think about it, because I do think that people view AI as like Terminator coming from the future to kill us.
Welcome, everyone, to the MSP Insider Show. This is the show for MSPs by a former MSP, where we break the narrative and say the things that others are unwilling to say that matter most to you as an MSP. On today's show, I'm excited to welcome David Powell, the VP of Sales Strategy at Pax8. And what we're going to talk about today is diving into all things AI, automation, and probably a bunch of other topics given his experience. So before we dive into why we're here today, David, please just give the audience the good version of your background and experience in this industry so they know that you're someone worth listening to.
Sure. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate that. Yeah. So I've been in this industry like a long time, like so long that back in the day, we had pivoted to recurring revenue. Somebody goes, oh, you're an MSP. You're like, oh, what's an MSP? So all the way from back then. And then I was at a company called TechLinks, where I was brought in to build the recurring revenue strategy. They were a VAR business. And we went on our MSP side from 300,000 a month to 3.6 million a month. So we had, great growth trajectory there. Then I went to Logic Monitor, where I ran the MSP business unit out there as the GM of that group. And we had fast growth there and exited that to Vista. Then I went and did a PE-backed roll-up of some MSPs. I advised them on their investment strategy. They picked the platform company. They dropped me in there as CRO. Then we acquired 3 more. And that was Corsica Technologies. Then I went over to Perch, worked with my good friends, Wes Spencer, Aaron Turnan, those guys. And then we exited that to ConnectWise. Then I was at ConnectWise a little bit. Then I went to serve out a non-compete outside of this industry for a little while, and then came back over into this space. Been at Pax8 for the past year and a half, almost 2 years. And over here, my job primarily is to help our partners learn how to sell cybersecurity to their end user customers. And then also to some degree, kind of like think about what's next and where are things going, and make sure that we're helping our partners align themselves towards that. And, obviously AI is the hot topic in that. And so that's what I've been looking at, spending a bunch of my time on. And, Jeffrey is kind of funny in this space. The old phrase, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So you don't have to be an expert. You just have to know more than everyone else. But so much so that they had me do a talk at the Microsoft Global Conference a couple of weeks ago on AI. And I was like, am I really qualified for this? But, if you know more than everyone else, then I guess that makes you an expert in this space. Because I don't know, this space is so fresh. I don't know if there's anybody that's an actual expert in it yet. So.
Yeah, and we'll dive into that, because I think there's a barrier of entry and a litmus test that we have to really understand as MSPs about how to even enter, because we have sort of this imposter syndrome and like fear of failure, where new stuff is scary to us.
Yeah.
And I'd love to dive into that. One of the ways that I've thought of that in the past was like when cloud came out, right? Now I'm a vendor now, but I was in MSP for 18 years. When cloud came out, I was in a VCIO seat before those things really existed too. And it was like every customer was asking about cloud, right? Because it was the marketing buzzword.
Yeah.
And every MSP I knew was avoiding it for like 18 months, 3 years or so, because it was, well, there were a lot of technical reasons too at that time. But I guess the question there is, what would you say to the MSP that thinks of AI as just the newest, flashiest buzzword that's nothing to be worried about for the next 18 months until I figure out what I'm going to do with it and how I'm going to do it? And just dive in there for me.
Yeah, I don't know that you can be slow on this one. Is, one thing that I've always kind of, part of my role, I feel like at Pax8, is to gently club our vendors over the head. Kind of like, here's what an MSP actually is thinking. And to some degree, I've often said that MSPs are not at a lack of good ideas. They're at a lack of actionable good ideas, right? So if I'm an MSP owner and I go to one conference and somebody's up there saying, you need to build a cybersecurity practice. Then I go to the next conference, they're like, you need to build a digital transformation practice. Then I go to the next one, they're like, you need to build an AI practice. I'm like, oh, all these are great ideas. And I come back to Jeffrey, who's my tier 3 super nerd, and I'm like, Jeffrey, we should do this, this, this. And you're like, bro, I've got a SQL server that's belly up. One of my support desk guys quit. I'm doing this job. I got this thing. I got all these. When am I going to figure out a business plan for those 3 things or vet those? And by the way, if I try to pick a vendor for one of those things, now you've committed me to like SDR emails all day long, and then I'm like, oh, okay. And I just go back in my office with these good ideas that we can never execute on. And so I think that MSPs kind of struggle with this. They're resource constrained lots of times. Having the talent that they can allocate to go figure something out and then build a business case around it is pretty low. So I think, to your point, some of them were deliberately dragging their heels, I think, with cloud, and then some were kind of waiting on someone else to figure it out.
Yeah.
Mark Twain said, good writers borrow, great writers steal, right? So I think they watched somebody else figure it out and they kind of stole that approach. I don't think you can do that with this. AI is moving too quick. My friends, the normies, people not in our space, are asking me about it. And literally every week there's something new, to do. So I think that the kind of patient approach or the stubborn approach, however you want to paint that, from MSPs in the past with new technology, I don't think you can have that approach with AI. I think that you're going to have to immerse yourself in it, dabble in it, tinker with it, figure it out, which you are capable of doing, right? It's not some kind of dark magic.
Right.
But you do need to allocate time and resources to kind of figure it out and tinker with it and see what the applications could be inside your business.
Yeah, like understanding it, or at least starting to dabble in it, is just a few keystrokes away, right? Like that's how accessible it is, which is the other reason why, and I agree with you completely, like you can't afford to sleep on this one, just like you said. And we've said in the past, like this is the type of technology that is fundamentally changing the way everything is done.
Yes.
It's not just changing business. It's not just changing service delivery. It's not just changing how quickly you can do X, Y, or Z. Like, and I'd love to dive into this too, is we look at AI as something that is there to empower and enable your people and not replace them.
Yes.
Right. And when used appropriately, we have never seen, none of us, not a single human living being today has seen the world that we're living in today when you're watching this as a result of the technological advancements of AI. So it's that kind of climate that's driving the urgency around, don't sleep on this one, because the competitors aren't, and you will not be able to catch up in that race.
Right. And what I say on that, Jeffrey, is like when this came out, Apple got rich, right? Selling these. But who really got rich were the people that wrote the applications on it, right? So WhatsApp and Instagram and all those people became billionaires. And so the way that I kind of help my friends contextualize this is like these LLMs are really like this iPhone. And the applications are what you're going to build on top of it that give unique business value, right? And so like I have a friend in the legal space, and he's telling me about some of the stuff that's going on with AI in the legal space. I got a physician friend who had gone out to Google's headquarters looking at AI and radiology. And so all of those little applications are going to pop up on top of this kind of foundational thing, which is all the different LLM platforms. And so I think when you begin to kind of dissociate it and stop looking at it as this kind of monolithic, oh, AI is this big thing. No. This is just a tool. And then what are the applications that we can build on top of this tool that create unique business value based on your particular use case?
Yeah, no, completely agree. And it's really in some ways no different than the way, if you look at the value chain, right? You essentially have the chip manufacturers, the hardware people, just like everything else from 20 years ago. And then beneath the hardware people are the providers, like the data centers that all the stuff's placed in, and the power and all the internet and everything else. And eventually you trickle down to the application layer. And if you go back and you look at the internet as an example, right? Eventually all of the value pooled for a while in the application layer as like the browsers themselves, right? But then fundamentally it leveled down, surprisingly enough, to where the data lived, right? Google. It was, okay, the browsers are great. Netscape was king until it wasn't anymore. And then eventually it became, how do we find the needles in the haystack on this thing called the internet? And we were talking before we started recording about how that's really the same trajectory that really business, but like the direction of AI is going, is pooling to the data and then the application layer that sits on top. Maybe paint a little picture there about thinking about MSPs as a whole. The amount of data we sit on is just massive, right? So let's paint a little bit of a picture of what's possible today, but also what will be possible 12 months from now, right?
Well, first, if you don't think this is a big deal, just know that Microsoft is looking at restarting nuclear reactors, to serve the data centers. So this is not, normal world that we're living in here, right? They're looking at 3 Mile Island and returning 3 Mile Island on to generate enough power to power all the GPUs running the underlying models, which is insanity when you think about it. So if you think, no, I'll wait this one out, dude, they're starting nuclear reactors to power this change. There is truly something, going on here. But I think to your point, is like this data piece. Data is the new oil, it's kind of what it's a phrase from a while ago. But it's like, it is to some degree, it's like that is where the power sits. And so when you kind of look at what an MSP is, I think that one of my big beefs over the years is that enterprise companies kind of look at MSPs as like cute. Oh, well, you just serve the SMB. And so one time I was punching EMC in the nose with this, and that I had my guys take we had thousands of customers, right? So I had them draw a quick network diagram of all of our customers, and then all the branch locations beyond that and all this kind of stuff. But I had them take the names out, right? And then when EMC came, I showed it to them. I'm like, hey, what is this? I don't know. What do you think it looks like? Well, that's a bank or a hospital system or something. That's a huge enterprise. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we manage, right? But instead of this being a hospital and a hospital and a hospital in a chain, this is a law office, a doctor's office, a car dealership, right? So when we as an MSP manage all of our customers in aggregate, that's an enterprise environment, right? We're just managing, it's multi-tenanted, but all of the complexity and all that kind of stuff, that's an enterprise environment. So when you look at it, we have massive amounts of data as an MSP that we're sitting on top of around, configurations out there, around ticket closure, around when we have closed something and it stayed closed, recurrence rate, reopen rates, all this kind of stuff, onboarding, offboarding. We have all this data. But the problem is that the service delivery team is largely fragmented, where, you may work with a customer one day and I may work with them the next day. Then Steve sitting next to us may work with them the next day. And so it's hard for one service delivery person to get a full picture of what's going on in a client environment. But all the data of what's going on in the client environment sits somewhere, right? So how do you inspect that data and then surface things that are relevant and meaningful and actionable and potentially automatable out of this massive data set that you have? And there's just no way for a human to look down into all that data and see the trends and all that kind of stuff. And there's no way for a human to do that. So when you look at MSPs, when I go out and talk to MSPs, what they usually struggle with is scaling. And what they're struggling with scaling is scaling their sales and scaling their service delivery, right? And so there is an answer, I think, emerging from AI that helps with both of those things if you can invest in it. But what you sure don't want to be, though, is the one that is not using AI to improve efficiency, competing with someone who is, that don't bring a knife to a gunfight. And so you're going to have embracing of these things. Otherwise, competitively, you run the risk of being left behind very, very quickly.
Yeah. And in such a way that it's not only left behind, like it's worse than a false start, right? You literally cannot and will not catch up because every day is like a piece of tech debt that you just can't re-overcome because of how quickly the people that are leveraging it are able to force multiply and just run laps around, your indecision ultimately, right?
Yep.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that because, I know that you're really well read on this stuff, enough to the point where you're out talking about it and you're invited onto Microsoft stage to even present on it as it relates to our space. So what are some of those things that, you didn't even know were possible until you read one of those articles about how people are truly applying AI, mostly to other verticals because MSPs haven't cracked that code yet, but because someone else is out there breaking that 4-minute mile for us, it's only a matter of days until vendors like Sift bring that kind of power to MSP specifically.
So I'll be honest, there's always this kind of like years ago, the first time I was in a Tesla that had some of the self-driving stuff, not the current version of FSD. This was 10 years ago, some of the early autopilot kind of stuff. And you're just like, all right, this is world changing, right? This is totally different. And then you flash forward and I was in a Waymo last year that was driverless, right? So you kind of watch that whole progression. But that first time I was like, oh, kind of mind blown. This is totally different. There was a video that came across social media this week from a company called Happy Robot that Andreessen Horowitz just invested in. And the video shows this guy sitting there and he's doing a logistics deal. So where he's trying to ship something from one place to another place. And he's interacting with his agent. And then he's trying to negotiate some stuff, like maybe the price needs to be different. And then this other guy gets a Slack message from this agent saying, hey, what about the price? And they negotiate the price. And then he picks back up off the hold, says, yeah, we can do that price. And he's like, well, can we pick it up an hour earlier? Then a phone call goes to another person, validates that. And also, then they kind of reveal that the agent working this logistics the whole time was AI, right? But the voice, the syntax, he said things like, "Hey man, we got that," and just that real casual, um, you know, engaging type of tone from that agent. But then also the fact that, if you know enough about technology, the decision criteria that sat in the background of that around, okay, we have a pricing change. Where can I go to get the answer to that? And it was via Slack. Right. Then it was a time change. And so there has some decision criteria in the back end of that said you have to ask this person for a time change. And then when the agent got the time change thing, he actually said at the end, he goes, "Okay, thanks. I'll ping you on Slack when this deal is done and update Salesforce." And you're just like, oh man, that's like crazy. Right. So when you kind of look at that, and that's for the logistics industry, but lift this concept and set it over, let's say it's medical, right? So if you're a physician and I'm trying to call and get an appointment, why does somebody have to sit there and do that? They know what the calendar is. They know the decision criteria around when they do new patient visits, sick visits, post-op follow-ups, whatever. So they could do that. Or when you kind of think about, could that be an SDR doing all those things where you have certain decision criteria around that? Or could that be a service delivery help desk person where he's doing those types of things? And there's certain things around that. I mean, the application of that into all the other industries to me was kind of mind-blowing. Because again, there's a lot of cute, oh, cool, I made this little video that looks like it's real, but it was AI generated. Or, oh, look, I had Perplexity plan a trip for me to Croatia or whatever. But when that looked like human interaction, and if you can do that, again, not taking the human out of the loop, and we'll talk a little bit about that last mile piece, not taking the human out of the loop, but having that would allow you to scale and apply people that normally would be doing all this back and forth stuff to more meaningful work on behalf of your logistics company.
Yeah. Now, before we move to the last mile, I think I would be doing a disservice to the old MSP in me, but all the other ones that are listening, if they didn't try to throw some realistic MSP challenge at you, which is a lot of MSPs historically sit on their belief system that my people are better, our service delivery is better, our value prop is different. Like these are the things that they've hung their hat on. How do you see someone who's approaching what you just said about the logistics example and then take that and plop it into MSP, right? The decision making and the reasoning, and just help me understand the parallel between where the world is going, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, and sort of that MSP that is still pretty dug in their heels about, we'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, so I've always kind of thought it's, the funny thing I've always said is that MSPs basically sell ass, right? And so they're selling an environment that needs to be available, secure, and supported, right? And that's it. And don't overcomplicate it. That's what you're selling, right? Is that if I'm the end user, is my environment available, right? Does it work? When I come in and log into Outlook, does it work? If it doesn't work, is there someone I can call to fix it? Is that supportable? And is it secure? Is it keeping the bad guys out? Right? That's all you're doing. And so I think that we over rotate towards this, like, it needs to be high touch, all stuff. No, what they really want is it to be fixed in a hurry. Right. And so but at the same time, there's kind of two things at work there. There was this research that was done one time, and I think it was for like Charter Spectrum. But basically what they played out was that if your internet was down, right, and my internet was down, and you put in a ticket that your internet was down and it came back on in an hour, but you never heard from them. You just put in a ticket and then an hour later it came back on. If I put in a ticket and it was down for 2 hours, but every 15 minutes I got a notice from them saying, hey, there's a tree down the line, we're sending someone out, I will report a better customer experience than you, even though my outage was twice as long because of the regular communication. But what I would say is I don't know if that has to be a human, right? I don't know that I need to be talking to a human as much as someone needs to be engaging with me. And if the experience is similar, like I don't want broken English, I don't want to sound like I'm talking to Siri, or something like that. But if it sounds like what Happy Robot demonstrated, I think if your customers got back online quicker and were communicated regularly with, I think that solves for a lot of that. So I think that we put too much emphasis sometimes on the human touch. But what I would say is that if I can do that on tier 1, then what I can do is have higher touch tier 2, right? Because I can take some of the soul crushing work. I mean, let's be real. No guy wants to reset a print spool or redo passwords and all those things, right? And those are not high value tasks
Yeah.
for your end user customer. They just need it done.
Right.
But if you can move people to more meaningful work where they feel like they're doing something that is more valuable, then I think you can enhance the whole customer thing without taking the human out of the loop.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a great segue, because one of the things that we found early on when we were rolling Sift out to users that were using it, early adopters, was there's still a fear of failure or like perfection piece, right?
Oh, yeah.
And enablement over perfection is the answer to using AI and to starting, at least from our experience. But the way that we designed our interface was, we call it speak it, review it, and submit it, right? And reviewing it was our way of keeping the man in the middle, to steal that term and use it a little differently.
Yeah.
It was like the human's still attached to the outcome, right? So you dictate what you want in a way that you don't have to actually dictate it like you're talking to Siri. You can talk just like I'm talking to David. And then we do a couple of things to it, which again, maybe the application of AI, we scrub out tech speak or tech breath, right? And so, you don't get a phone call from a customer about, David's the greatest technician, he always solves my problem, but man, he makes me feel like an asshole, or he makes me feel stupid, or any of that stuff, because we can reprocess what was said and scrub it out for sentiment through a hospitality lens, right? And rewrite the client-facing communication in such a way that you never take a frustrated phone call again as it relates to human-to-human interaction.
Yeah.
And we found a lot of benefit in that, because we've enabled and empowered more people to do more things more effectively without sort of the downside risk of communication issues. So that the second piece that I say there, that I found out also, to go to your like Comcast example, was the thing we always preach the hardest in a service-based business, which is what MSPs are. They pretend they're tech companies, but they're really service companies, right? Was communication and expectations will get you all the way there every time. It's the first thing to go, but it's the thing you have 100% control over. And yet we fail and we fall and we trip. And that's the thing that costs us clients. It wasn't the outage, to your point, right? It could have been 4 hours, but if you talked to me every 15 minutes with an appropriate expectation, and you reset the expectation, then I'm going to be happy and I'll give you glowing reviews. So let's talk now a little bit more about how we see the last mile playing out as it relates to AI and MSP.
So on that last point, though, real quick, there's this thing I always talked about called trust capital, right? And I can't remember who wrote about this, but it's this idea that like when you do something good, you put money in your pocket, right? And when you do something bad, you pay that money out, right? And the point is that you never lose a customer or a relationship or your job, right, on a $5 mistake. You lose it on a nickel mistake, but you reach in your pocket and there's no trust capital left. Right. And so that customer that's like, Jeffrey, I can't do this anymore, I got to leave. But this wasn't even a big deal. Well, because it was the last thing, you know? And so back to your point around that expectation management and stuff like that, is falling on your sword, admitting when you're wrong, all those kinds of things puts trust capital in. And you never want to be in a position where you reach in your pocket and you're like empty of it. Right. But to your point about the human in the loop, and I read this article about the human being the last mile of AI. And if you've been in this industry a long time, you remember the last mile is the connection to your house, right? So Bell South, AT&T, whoever owns the last mile, to your house. Well, now, and they use DoorDash as an example as the last mile in food distribution, is that they make the food somewhere else, they deliver it to your house. And if for your listeners, if they've never Googled ghost kitchens, Google ghost kitchens. It's a super interesting concept kind of around that, but they need DoorDash for the last delivery mile. But in our space, the last mile is the human, and human discernment cannot be replicated by AI. So the example in the article that I read, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit, was basically like, if I had an AI agent that was going to book me a dinner reservation with my wife, right? And it said, David, here's the nicest restaurant in town. Booked your res there. Well, what it doesn't know is like that restaurant's kind of quiet and dull. And, my wife and I really wanted a place that was a little more upbeat and happening, that night. It can't get that like mood that we're looking for. Or it may say, hey, Jeffrey, you posted this job, and your AI agent's going to say, out of all the resumes that we reviewed, this is the one that most closely aligns to that. But you've talked to that person, and they're kind of like douchey and wouldn't be a good fit for your team. Right. Even though they may perfectly check the job description, it's never going to get that fit. Oh, this person is my team is going to hate this guy, and so we can't pick them. That's that human discernment. And so another example is I've got a friend who's in radiology, and he was talking about this idea that, computer AI should be able to like compare, PET scans, CT scans, mammograms, and all this kind of stuff, and then spit out ones. And the computer's not saying you have cancer. The computer's saying, yo, human, pay attention to this one, right? So the human doesn't miss that one in all the hundreds they may review. Now the human only has to review 10 because the computer sorted the ones where there's no change and now put in the human in the loop for human discernment around, oh, that's an anomaly, but that's not typically cancerous based on all of my, experience. So to me, where all this comes in is like, what is the human still has to play the role in that last mile? And we kind of think about automation. AI is not going to decide what needs to be automated, right? A human has to sit there and say, like, okay, we can automate this process because customers just want it done. We can't automate this process because this is a high touch, high value piece of our value proposition to the customer. So we're never going to have an AI bot do quarterly business reviews, right? We're going to show up on site with a box of donuts and have those quarterly business reviews face to face. But these other parts, print spooler, SQL hung on startup, password reset, AIs can do those because those are low value, high impact, type of things. And so that's where the humans still will need to be in the loop. And we're never going to automate all the humans out of it. They're going to own that last mile of human discernment. And I think that is a great way. When I read that article, I'm like, that's an epiphany. It's a great way to kind of think about it, because I do think that people view AI as like Terminator come from the future to kill us. And in this case, it's like, no. It's a tool that we can use just like a gun. I can rob a bank or I can defend my home. It's going to be how we use it in the business.
Yeah, I would. What that makes me think about is really like flow state, right? And in the world of MSPs, where you're constantly distracted by everything that you have to react to, even at the ownership level or just middle management, doesn't really matter where you are. The same thing is true. And the way that I see AI playing a role there as it slides into MSP is it almost like when you get your very first executive assistant, right? Or admin assistant, that what do? They quiet the noise, right? They dampen the things that take your attention or distract you, but aren't really like, it's not that they're not high value. It's just that you can't take that real estate away in your mind once it's there, even if you have to respond to the 9,000 emails in your inbox. And so when AI applied to the noise of an MSP's business allows you to get to the three things that I always found inside my MSP of like, this was utopia, is when I had visibility, I could have measurability, and then I could apply accountability.
Yeah.
But without the visibility, I couldn't get the measurability. I was constantly reacting to the firefighting mode, right? It was a dumpster fire. The client called pissed or whatever it was. And I was always frustrated. We would call it like no preventable outages, right? That was one thing. And then also never ask a question we should already know the answer to. Two biggest pet peeves ever from the MSP space, right? But and you'd get that phone call or the voicemail and you'd be like, how did we get here? Right? Well, you didn't have visibility, so you couldn't measure it. And now the visibility is the frustrated voicemail. To your point earlier, we would call it the goodwill bucket, right? You're either withdrawing or depositing from this goodwill bucket. And when you put yourself in a situation where you're either constantly withdrawing or you're not adding in, like you aren't getting the business ahead of the standard attrition even, you end up in that world. And so the way I see, just to like break down the barriers, like, okay, you don't trust AI, you have all these false beliefs about it. But what about a world where you could just quiet the noise a bit to have, to your point, human discernment, right? The magic of what your people can do in a service business is so much more effective when they're not distracted by things that can be automated.
And man, as in my intro here, I've been on the vendor side and I've been on the MSP side. And sometimes I like the vendor side a lot better, particularly in SaaS, because all of your customers are happy or none of them are, right? Because SaaS is either working or it's not. But the MSP space, no one calls you on a Monday. It's like, hey, Jeffrey, guess what? Everything worked today. I came in, everything worked. Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. No, it is constant barrage of somebody is not happy, right? And so while sometimes you want to be a little judgy of some of your support guys, like, how did you let it get to this point, right? At the same time, you want to have a lot of grace for them because, like, man, it is a hard gig to pick up the phone if somebody's kind of irritated or something's not working just all the time. And so to your point about quiet the noise, if you could take some percentage of that volume off of them, where those are being handled by an AI agent that's clearing those tickets and the customer's happy with it, then you probably have a little bit more bandwidth to deal with the ones that do come your way. And the ones that come your way should be higher value. So you're like, oh, I can see I'm making a difference when I fix this thing. not I'm setting the print respooler, again.
Yeah.
And so I think that those are the resetting the print spooler. Not there is no respooler as the printer, but I think that those are the things where you're like, okay, how can I make these humans more effective, more engaged with their work? And the way to do that is take the routinized, boring tasks off their plate
Yeah.
and let an agent do it, for them. And I think ultimately these are human businesses. And I think the more effective we can make them, the better off they're going to feel.
Yeah. And I know you've talked about this in the past, which is what I hear you saying too, is we're actually going to give our people back the ability to do more meaningful work more of the time
Yes.
for more of our people, right? More of our
Yes.
customers. And in the end, like that's going to take us back to the roots of how MSPs initially even started, came and grew, right? Word of mouth happens because you were referable. You did a phenomenal job, right?
Yeah.
You came and you mowed their lawn for the $75 an hour that you were doing your project work for. Like it didn't really matter, but that's kind of the reality in some ways, but in a different version of our reality where we're going to get back to is we actually can get down to the people part of the business again.
Yeah.
Where we're at the end of the day.
I know that you live in middle America and I do too. And I mean, these are relationship communities, right, that we live in. Mm-hmm. And I think the MSPs lose sight of the fact sometimes, like, why do you exist, right? And it's a very much a mom, God, and apple pie kind of thing, is that, where do we like to shop? Mm-hmm. Small to medium businesses in our community. Where do we like to eat? Small to medium businesses in our community. Who employs our friends? Small to medium businesses in our community. Who employs our family? Small to medium business. And like, who is at risk of not surviving cybersecurity threats and all this kind of stuff, or small to medium businesses in our community. And so an MSP serving these companies well, protects kind of Main Street America. And there is this kind of Main Street America thing around it. But I think sometimes MSPs get so beat down by all the noise and all the stuff coming their way that you kind of lose sight of, like, why are we doing this to begin with? Right. We're doing this to begin with to serve our SMBs. And I think it's an easy story to tell. If I was talking to one of my customers and like, hey, Jeffrey, you might not get to talk to Steve on the support desk as frequently as you have. But guess what? When you do talk to him, it's going to be because you need to, because there's going to be this AI that's handling all that stuff in a very quick way that you normally call in to, talk to Steve about. And so now you and Steve can talk about the local baseball team or the weather because AI agents are killing all those other tickets and you're only bringing high value stuff to Steve.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point to drive home too, because I can remember we had at one of the MSPs I worked for at the time, we supported over 12,000 endpoints, right? But again, we also live and operated in middle America. We were the largest small business footprint in the state when you really thought about it, because what company in Nebraska had 12,000 employees that they were responsible for? And honestly, it was even more employees, just that was the devices, right? On network and managed and all that stuff. I don't think MSPs really give themselves enough credit for the criticality of what they do and who they do it for. Because if you really look at the total footprint that you have and then compare it to the businesses that have that many endpoints, like you're in a category of mid-market or enterprise, probably, even though you're operating, at the SMB state at best.
12,000 endpoints, again, that's a hospital system. That's a bank. That's First Bank in Nebraska probably has 12,000 endpoints, right? And so you're on the same level as those types of companies, but I don't know that MSPs view themselves in that way. And there's a little self-esteem issue sometimes, I think, in the MSP space, and they should view themselves as like, holy crap, we run a massive environment and we do it really well. And I think they should take some pride in that. But why they're doing it is to serve the small to medium businesses in your community.
Yeah. Let's double down on that thought then, because I know if we just look at the spectrum that the MSP market sits on, right? 80% of that's going to be sub 10 people, roughly $1 million in revenue, the smaller mom and pop shop. Let's think about it that way. We talked a lot about AI. We've hopefully drawn a line in the sand that says you can't ignore this anymore.
No, can't sit it out.
Yeah. So what would David Powell's pull up a chair, heart to heart, eye to eye, 3-step framework be for that MSP to actually get involved with AI and have it start impacting their business right away?
Yeah. So sadly, the first thing you have to do is some kind of data governance, right? At the end of the day, if you're going to train a model on any of your data, you have to do a data governance project. And I would say there's a lot of lack of discipline just in the industry around that. I'm particularly in fast growth companies. Jeffrey worked for me when we had 2 employees and he had access to the S drive. Now we have 200 employees and Jeffrey still has access to the S drive. Should he? And so I think there needs to be a data governance project. Number 2 is start tinkering with it personally. is I think that a lot of people can surface use cases in the business when they begin to see what it's capable of, themselves. And if you're Microsoft, Copilot Studio is a great tool for that, to go tinker with certain things. You don't have to be a programmer. I think that I thought you had to be a programmer in this stuff. You do not have to be a programmer. This is just like type in English, because it's all very, and then you can prompt it to help you improve this thing that you're creating. Then I think once you kind of realize what the capabilities are to a large degree, then I would say look at the things that can be automated inside your business. So what is something that somebody's doing that they hate doing? And then is there a way to automate that so that person doesn't have to do it anymore and free them up? And if you can automate 1%, then 5%, and then 10%, that's real business value creation if you could do that. So it's really just like anything else, is most MSPs are very on the job training, learning, is that most of us didn't go to like MSP school. I don't even know if there is such a thing. We didn't go to MSP school and learn this stuff and get a master's in MSP. So the part I want to be clear on is like, I want to be very encouraging. Like, you're capable of doing this. This is not dark magic sorcery. And I think that's always been one of my beefs in the cybersecurity space, is that your cybersecurity guys want you to think that it's dark sorcery and dark magic that's only practiced by them. And that's just not true. I look like I'm headed to the golf course all the time, and I know cybersecurity really well. Similarly, whatever it is around this AI thing, this is not the exclusive province of the nerds, right? Is that ultimately, I think this is pretty democratized now, where your typical business guy can lean into it and extract some real business value from it.
So that was a great recap of like how MSPs could really start to work with AI inside their business. And I completely agree on the data governance side. Like, you got to be thinking through those things. Now, the other side to that, just like we're having a conversation about AI, is that MSPs are probably getting questions from their customers as it sits today, right? Whether it's Microsoft pinging them about Copilot being available, or their friends figuring out that Perplexity can plan a trip to Croatia for them, right? Whatever it is, AI is the next conversation, sort of like cloud was 10 years ago. And so, what is the very first step that an MSP who has trepidation about AI as it sits, right? What's the very first thing they can do to place themselves in a better position to engage in those conversations with their customers instead of running away from it?
Yes, I think number one, there's a lot of good reading that can be done. There's a lot of content out there on AI around how people are using it. Microsoft's got some good content around Copilot. The way I kind of think about Copilot, by the way, is like raw materials and finished goods. Is raw materials is kind of the LLM and all that kind of stuff. Copilot is a finished good, right? And so they have made Copilot. And then I would say with Copilot, you can make additional finished goods with some of the agents that you can build with Copilot. But I think that's a good way to kind of conceptualize where Microsoft sits in that. But the other part is like, just start having a conversation with your customer. Don't be afraid of it. Be like, hey, you may have some questions around AI. And I think our message ought to be hopeful. Our message should not be, it's coming for your jobs, it's coming to kill you. It's not Arnold Schwarzenegger from the future. And just be like, and begin to build up some stories around what you've seen, and then you can just begin to educate your customer, just like cybersecurity. Most of your customers probably aren't jumping on it now, but you will need to show them how. So basically the same kind of stuff I've said about cybersecurity forever. You can't sell what you don't do. So you have to take cybersecurity seriously yourself before you can go sell it to your customers. I think that you need to figure out some AI use cases yourself. And then you can go and say like, hey, by the way, Mr. Customer, this is what we're doing with AI. Is there something similar to this that you're doing internally from a business process standpoint? I will say though, MSPs are this AI conversation is a little more like business process reengineering than it is true tech. And so just like cybersecurity is a risk conversation, and they weren't as comfortable going in and talking about risk, this is a little outside of what your comfort zone is, and that's okay, right? Just like a lot of MSPs have learned to be okay talking about risk so they can lead into cybersecurity. Now you're going to have to be able to talk about business processes so you can lean into that. And like there's tools like Roost and all this kind of stuff that do all the RPA, but if the business processes aren't known, it's really difficult to automate stuff out.
Yeah, I love that you really brought that home too, because I think the way that the prospect or the client market and their attitude toward MSP has shifted in the last 5 years, as well as the way that MSP is shifting, at least the ones that are aware of how the market's accepting it, is that you really almost have to start positioning yourself away from being an MSP and more towards something more like a business services professional company, right? Like it's a lot less about the bytes and the bits and the tech and the hardware and banging on keyboards anymore, as it is really helping businesses embrace the technologies that exist that are eclipsing the old ones.
Yeah.
How can they actually jump on that Bronco and ride it for the 8 seconds and come out a winner versus in their own right, like they're going to sit this one out and it's going to have just as bad of an impact on them and their business as we've talked about for MSPs. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, I always talk about the speed at which we've gone through these changes, kind of creative destruction, if you will, we've done this a million times. I had this slide that shows the number of people who used to work as elevator operators in America. Then there was a panic around ATMs. So ATMs come out and people are like, what do we do with all these bank clerks, and stuff. I think the difference this time is it's faster, right? And so the other times we've created disruption and then we've been able to kind of figure out what that disruption meant and accommodate it because it's taken a little bit longer to go. Now, I think this is going to move really quick. And so you're going to have to figure out how to embrace it and utilize it, because if you don't, I'm afraid that, the competitive market can change quickly on people. And I think your job can change quickly. So, I mean, there's this one, I can't remember who I was reading about, but talks about as like butter passing jobs, which is like, hey, can you pass the butter?
Oh, sure.
And all you do is take the butter and pass it to someone else. I call them email jobs, which if all you do is sit there and receive email, do something and send it back to someone else, that can be automated, right? And so the question there is like, we don't necessarily just cast those people to the wayside, but we need to accommodate and like, okay, how can we pivot them towards more high value work instead of their whole job probably was a soul crushing job anyway, if all you're doing is butter passing. And so I think the speed at which that's going to happen is we're going to need to be in tune to these disruptions coming, because they're going to come more quickly, I think, than anything else that we've seen, if the current scenario is any indicator of that.
Yeah. I love that. I love the butter passing concept.
You pass the butter? Sure. There you go.
Yeah. That's going
to
come out so good. Yeah. All right. One of the other questions I had was, all right, so you were just recently on the stage at Microsoft Ignite speaking specifically about AI, and you also have an extensive background in MSP tech and everything else. So what was the one unexpected takeaway you had from that event about AI?
How easy this is. So when I was on stage, I mentioned that I live in Alabama, that I'm a college football fan and stuff. Flash forward to the end of my talk, and I'm up there and I'm encouraging MSPs like, hey, go tinker with this, figure it out, try it. Think of something that you don't enjoy doing in your work and see if there's a way to automate that inside Copilot Studio. And as a joke, I said, in fact, I've probably got some of my coworkers here in the audience that are wanting to build an agent to talk to me about college football. Okay. The little meme, like 1 hour later, 1 hour later, I get a message in Teams from this guy I work with, Adam. And he's like, hey, great talk. I watched it online. I built an AI agent to talk college football with you. It's called Gridiron Guru. Right. And he actually fed it some stuff that I had done before, talked, because it said, you should respond to David sounding like David. So talk to David in the manner in which David Powell talks. So he created a AI agent that can talk to me about college football and talk to me in the tone that I use. And it took him 10 minutes. So the first thing I do is I'm like, okay, let's see how good Gridiron Guru is. So I ask it a question, kind of a complex question about the transfer portal. If you don't know much about college football, this is not like there's a ton of information. And I asked how about Indiana's use of the transfer portal versus some other teams and stuff. And the answer it gave was like really good. And so that was just kind of one of those moments to like, okay, not that you want to monetize this or go build this, but the point is that something can go from idea to execution in a very short amount of time. And I think that is the big takeaway I had, is that kind of blew my mind, is this idea that I used to think that, I had this idea and I don't own the technical knowledge. I don't own the coding skills. I don't own any of that stuff to turn this into execution. And what Copilot Studios seem to have done is democratized everything in between. So you can go from idea to execution. So then I asked Adam to get on a call with me. I'm like, show me what you did. And he showed me what he did. I'm like, well, crap, I can do that. It wasn't like some kind of, again, it wasn't dark magic, wasn't dark sorcery. It was pretty easy. And that was probably the most mind-blowing moment for me.
Yeah. And so to tie that back in, because that's a great story with a great timer on it, right? 10 minutes to do that. Like,
Yeah.
it takes longer to drive to the office, right?
Yes, it does.
And or to be late for the next meeting. Like, that's usually what's happening in that time frame. But to think through that same scenario, and then let's plop the gridiron guru into MSP guru, right? Every MSP deals with, was it Price's law or Pierce's law, but essentially says like the square root of the total number of people that work for you, the 80% of the work's done by that square root number. So in a 10-person MSP, the lion's share of the work is done by 1 to maybe 2 people. Now that might sound condescending, but it's not the way that it works. Everyone knows the guy, right? Who, or the girl. Who do you go talk to when you have those questions, right? So now if you could take much of what that person has already communicated, whether it was verbally or in documentation or in ticket notes, right? Like the breadcrumbs already exist, but it's he or she who manipulates that information into a consumable and interaction, like interactive bot. It's like, well, you never have to wait for the tier 3 escalation anymore, right? It's literally sitting there in your Teams or in a different chat system. And it's just readily available. And it may not be a 10-minute task given the context you'd offer it, but the fact that your coworker did that in 10 minutes should at least tell MSPs, hey, we can start looking at some things that we could have implemented within a week that could at least help with, maybe it's just the number one escalated thing in your business, right?
Yeah.
And preloading that into the right micro agent that
well,
just
someone I
addresses
work a lot with, Maddie, I got her to join that call where I was like, show me your ways, right?
Yeah.
And so Maddie does cybersecurity marketing for us. And so the one we made in there was, we went through and it's like, basically we created a newsletter that was going to show up in Maddie's inbox every Monday just for Maddie, with articles about cybersecurity incidents and information around our largest cybersecurity vendors, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, and all this kind of stuff, that they have new features. And so we created it and then could automate that. So every Monday she gets an email from a Copilot agent that is summarizing basically this week in cybersecurity and what are the new things that are happening with our biggest vendors. And that we knocked that out. And, I mean, he was showing us how to do it and maybe took 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah. It's so wild. Another similar example to how we've done some things too is like, we want to go to where the voices of our customers are, which for MSPs, one of the best places to go is Reddit, right? And we want to hear and see what people are saying. So from certain subreddits, we can monitor and watch it via basically an RSS feed, and then feed that into an LLM that knows what we do at Sift and whether or not we can help with the context of what they're generally bitching about, and then push that to Slack and say, hey, here's a message in this subreddit about a thing that we know that you can help with, and then take it the extra step. It knows our value prop and what we actually solve for. Here's a generalized theory, 3 bullet points of like how we truly help the thing, cool. Right? And yet we don't have to sit there and scrape and sit and watch and wait inside online communities anymore, because that part's been automated, and we kept the human in the middle, right? Because it's not like we took ourselves out of it entirely. It's still us pushing keys on the button at the moment to actually go in and respond, should we choose to those subreddits. But the power that's given us, right? And by power, not from like an almighty power thing. It's like, no, we can really get in front of the things that we need to get in front of. In fact, one of the very first things that fired off on it was great. I actually loved it. I mean, you'll find the subreddit if you want to, but it was some guy who spelled my name wrong and said, anyone else getting spammed by this guy about some, AI sorcery, couple of 4-letter words or whatnot. Well, because I happened to see it get scraped, right? Then I was able to go in and create a Reddit account, because I'd lost my other one from 20 years ago, right? And created it and had a conversation with multiple people in that one subreddit, and showed up. I'm sure it was spooky or weird to have the guy that you were calling out there, but it also closed 3 deals because he didn't want to believe that what we did was real. So he was, flaming it and calling it snake oil. But then other people in the comments are like, you do what? Let me see, right? Show me, DM me the demo. I want to see this. Great. It's ungated. Go to the website. It's like, we aren't playing by those same rules. And
that's cool.
And all of that was possible because we looked at basically ideation. If I could do this, this would be great. And then you can. And to your point, it only took about probably 30 minutes to get that whole thing set up. And
shorten the cycle from idea to execution, man. There's a lot of awesomeness right there.
Yeah. For sure. Now, David, based on the intro, I mean, you've been in this game a long time. I've personally known you in the space for 4 years over a couple of those last stops. And so you can't be, it can't be new for you to people to come up and, hey, Mr. You, just in passing in the hallways, right? Like,
Gray
hey, I
hair,
want to pick
Jeffrey.
your
Gray
brain.
hair.
Hey, what do you think about this? What's going on? And so, one question I had for that is, what is one important truth that very few people agree with you on?
Ooh, I think that's like a hard. I think that's a hard answer, but I think what I would typically say to that would be emotional detachment from your beliefs. So I was a high school debater, and in high school debate, they teach you you have to argue both sides of the same argument, right? So you could say this is the greatest president ever, this is the worst president ever, back to back. And so what you learn is that what I believe is not attached to me, right? It's this abstracted out kind of thing. And so over the years, as I've been able to have beliefs that don't impact, if you disagree, that's okay. We're disagreeing with this thing. You're not attacking me personally. What I found though is that most people can't do that. And so it's very difficult is that you don't, a lot of people do have that attachment to their beliefs. And that if I say, well, I disagree with you, then you think, well, this person's mean to me or doesn't like me or whatever, instead of, no, I just don't like this, concept. So that plus this idea of like, I don't believe people are entitled to opinions. I believe people are entitled to informed opinions. And I think the most powerful thing that anyone can really say is that I don't have enough information to have an opinion on that. Instead, most people, I think, take the opinions of others and then turn that into something about their persona. I've adopted, all of these ideas that I didn't actually think through or come up with, but I've heard someone else that I think is smart or I think is the right thing. I've absorbed those in, and now that's become part of my identity. And I think that's a problem, is that I think by and large that people should either be well informed and have opinions, and that's fine. Strong opinions held loosely. Be open to there being a different way of viewing that, or just say, I don't have enough information to have that opinion. But man, most people like to have opinions, and then it becomes inextricably linked to kind of who they are as a person. So that would be my answer to that.
What a phenomenal answer. I would say even doubling down into your answer as to why in our space you see that so little or few, and it might be the same as any other space. I don't know. MSP is all I've ever done for the last 20 years. But the thing that I found to be fairly true is like that perceived fear of failure, like the not knowing or not having the answer, because we're put in this position of being problem solvers and needing to have the answers all the time. It's such a, there's an emotional attachment to having to say, I don't know. Right. Or to like being perceived as not knowing. And that was such an interesting emotional hurdle that I had to watch a lot of early, like inexperienced or younger folks, just like me, because I had to learn that the hard way too, early on in the career as a tech person, was, saying I don't know is okay. And not only is it okay, but it's incredibly empowering because it creates the connection between you and the person that you're helping, that you don't actually seem perfect, right? Yeah. Like you're relatable now. You're a real person.
Trust.
Yeah. It's wild, right? So I love that answer. Let's see what I don't need to wrap.
And then the advice.
Oh yeah, the ones. Yeah, perfect. So I'm gonna look at my phone for this. So that, one, I don't screw it up, and two, it's just the way it's gonna play. But this will be, let's call it the last question for time, probably. So David, in preparation for today's conversation, we were just kind of going back and forth over text message a bit to lay the groundwork and kind of set the agenda of what we wanted to talk about. But there was this thing that I like to say, once I see it, I can't unsee it. It happens to me often, which is great. But there was a piece of the text that you had sent me that really rung true. And I felt as though it really connected and resonated with me as like the former MSP in this space. And I wanted you to elaborate on it, one, because we haven't elaborated on it personally, but really to kind of go through it. And one of the things that you said is one of the things that you do that sets you apart sometimes that anyone can do, which I thought was a really important statement that you added, was one, embrace disruptive change, two, learn new things quickly, and three, be curious. I wondered if you could unpack that for me here.
Yeah. So I think that what people tend to point out is like my superpower is storytelling. And I do think that you can get better at that, but there is something innate, I think, around that. I think people can always improve, but there is something innate. But then the other three things that I kind of would say are superpowers, but anyone can do, to your point, are those: embrace disruptive change. That when something new comes out, don't be the naysayer. Go try to figure it out. And the problem is that culture likes to punish the people who say, oh, this is going to be awesome, and it isn't. And they never punish the people who say this is going to suck and it turns out to be awesome. Right. So the naysayers can naysay all day long and there's never any accountability. But if you're the one that says this is going to be amazing and it's not amazing, then everyone wants to throw rocks at you for that. But no one ever comes back and throws rocks at the morons that are like, well, the internet's not really going to be a thing, or the iPhone's never going to take off. Right. Those people never have any accountability. So I'm like, embrace disruptive change no matter what. Then 2, learn new things quickly. So when there's something new that comes out, how do you quickly learn that and, build it into your vocabulary, build it into your talk tracks. And I think that when you learn new things quickly, that keeps you ready for, what's next and what's coming next and all kinds of stuff. And the 3rd is be curious. It's like, I'm a genuine believer. I'm naturally curious, but I think that just asking people questions and just listening. And so what I used to tell my sellers and stuff before was take the factory tour. Right. And what that actually means is, like, if I was doing a sales call with you, it may be in the most boring office ever. Right. But at the end of the meeting, I'm like, well, Jeffrey, show me around your office. And you walk me around. You get way more insights than when you are sitting across from one another trying to sell them something or something like that. Or go look at the factory and like, oh, tell me about that. What does that machine over there do? And just like be curious in general. And I think that helps you build your stories, that helps you build your information that you can surface later in other, contexts. So yeah, embrace disruptive change, learn new things quickly, be curious. Anybody can do those 3 things. But I think when you do those things, it does create additional superpowers later.
Yeah. David, I could literally talk to you all day, but I know that's not possible. And there's really nothing I can add to that. Like, the way that you close that out is so applicable to the entire hour that we've spent here talking about AI and automation, basically all the new scary stuff, right? That we're intimidated by. And yet, if you really anchored it down and distilled it down into those 3 things, every one of those bullet points and even the examples you gave is so relevant to the conversation that we just had as it relates to AI and how you can just take that first step to bring it into your business or to help your customer with it, right? Like, ignorance isn't bliss. You cannot avoid this forever. You can't bury your head in the sand. No. I mean, should you choose to, you can, but you'll never pull it out, I guess is the point.
Yeah.
Right?
It's coming whether you like it or not. So
yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming on and being our first guest on the exclusive interview series for MSP Insider, the show that is powered by Sift, here to break the narrative and say the things that aren't otherwise being said for MSPs by MSPs. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Jeffrey.